It is so hot. I kind of want to make a doll. And so I did. Kind of. I mean, I didn't really make a doll, as in full on make it, because that shit is hard. And don't get me wrong, there's people who sculpt full on ball jointed dolls, like joints and all. But I am not one of them. Most definitely not. I did, however, customize a doll. Still, that is crafty enough, I think. So, I wanted to share it with you. So, let's start right at the beginning. I very recently fell down this huge rabbit hole of watching doll customization videos. Maybe you've seen those as well, you know, maybe on YouTube, maybe on Instagram. Those videos of people taking old dolls, mostly Monster High dolls, wiping their face off and then painting them new. Maybe you're even subscribed to a couple of doll artists like I am. Like, two of my favourites of all time are Delightful and Hexagon, so... Or maybe you've seen a documentary on the Popobi sisters who make those really beautiful, dainty, fragile-looking dolls. Or maybe you're a fan of ball-jointed dolls. I still remember those being very popular in the otaku scene when I was still younger, maybe around 14, 15. They probably still are. I kind of wanted to try that out for myself. I would actually consider myself to be a very creative person. I love crafting and painting and doing things with my very own hands. Plus, I tend to be a little jittery and nervous at times, so focusing on little details and steadying my hand for painting really helps with that. And I haven't really been creative in a really long time, at least that's what it feels like. So I felt like a change of pace was in order. Where to start? Well, at the attic, of course. Since I'm currently still with my parents, Rona and all, I asked my mum to let me up in the attic and get down some of my old Barbie dolls to work with. So for this customization project, I used the Wings Club Flora doll. I didn't even know we still had those, but a lot of doll artists actually use Monster High dolls for their projects. They're very dainty and cutesy looking, which I feel like is the aesthetic a lot of people go for. They're also posable and ball jointed. I didn't really have any of those at my disposal. I mean, I technically have, but all of those were my sister's at some point and she didn't want me to paint on them, so I wanted to respect her wishes. I used the Flora doll because I feel like the Wings Club dolls, with their dainty and thin bodies as well as their big heads, would go best with that aesthetic. She's not posable though, which is kind of sad, but I think it's okay. And it also means that I don't have to watch out for the joints too much while I paint her. In the end, I still wish I'd started on a different doll. I found her quite hard to paint on. The plastic wouldn't really soak up the paint as nicely as I wanted it to. Plus, I found her face mold to be very tiny and restrictive. I worked on Barbies for other projects following this one, and I found them to be a lot easier to paint on. Plus, their body would take on the paint much easier than the Flora doll has. I should also mention that I kind of had everything I painted this doll with already at home at my disposal. This started as more of a dabbling, sort of quarantine boredom project, so I didn't want to spend too much money on it. I know myself pretty well at this point, even though there's still a lot to go and a lot to discover. But I know myself well enough to know that whenever I start a new hobby, I'm usually head over heels and deck myself in with a lot of new stuff to fit that hobby. And then after a while, I get bored with it and that whole mania around it slows down a little and I'm sitting on all of that stuff, having spent a lot of money and looking for something new to work on. So I wanted to be careful to start with and just try and see what I already had at home. So, what do you need? Well, let me show you. A willing volunteer, colours and dyes. I've used acrylics. I've also seen a lot of doll artists use watercolour pencils or pastels, which weirdly did not work out for me. Fabric, beads and glitter, anything really. Acrylic yarn and a pet brush. Glue, lots of it. And last but not least, varnish in both glossy and matte, as well as some acrylics fixative. Most doll artists actually use MSC or Mr. Super Clear, which is a Japanese fixative mainly used in like tabletop model building. For this project I swapped the MSC with regular acrylics fixative. This is a bit tricky and risky. It worked out fine for me and I like the result, but I've seen it not work for others. The MSC doesn't just seal the doll, it also makes it so that you're able to draw on it in the first place. I think since I've used mainly acrylics and not watercolor pencils and pastels, which I've tried and it didn't really work, so that may be due to me not using MSC. But since I used mainly acrylics, I think it was fine since the materials worked well together. But if you're planning on using something else, maybe invest in the MSC. But let's stop talking and start customizing. Before I laid hands on a volunteer, not victim, volunteer, I had to prep some things. Since I didn't really have a clear idea in my mind yet what I wanted the doll to look like, I took to sketching. I was going for something cute and quirky. I also knew that I wanted her to be a little bit bubbly, airy and pinkish in colour. I had some materials in mind that I wanted to use, as in lace and certain beads that I had lying around at home, and I also knew a hairstyle that I wanted to do. I had recently watched a space bun tutorial by Mosaikito, another doll artist I watch, and so I wanted my doll to have space buns because I wanted to try that. During the project I also ended up improvising a lot because some things didn't really work out the way I wanted them to, while others did, so the sketch was just a rough thing to go by. I also needed to prepare some hair. You can easily do that by using acrylic yarn and brushing it out so it looks like hair. I used some dusty pink as well as some white. First, tie your hair around something just to keep it fixed. I then used a pet brush to just untangle the yarn and fluff it up. I feel like other brushes would probably work as well, as long as their bristles are really thin and can get in between those fibres. After brushing out the hair, I used a flat iron to, iron it flat. I didn't really film that part because first off I had to change locations and go into the bathroom, and secondly I think it's self-explanatory. Then I laid my hair wefts down flat and added some glue to the end where I'd bound it to the chopstick. Get your doll! As with any art, you'd want to start with a clean canvas. Take some cotton pads or swabs, dunk them in acetone and wipe down the factory paint with it. You could use nail polish remover, but it should contain acetone as well. Just check the label and you'll see whether it's in there or not. You'll also want to remove the pre-rooted hair. For that, I took a pair of scissors and just cut it off, and then used a pair of pinchers to get out the rest that was still sticking in there. After having the doll prepped, I went outside and sprayed it with the first couple of layers of my fixative. So, while I was out on the balcony, I found a dead wasp. Now, this step is totally optional, but if you want a really cool project, I totally suggest you do it. I took that wasp, went back into my room, got some resin out, and then poured it over that wasp. Wasps are dipshits, so they kind of deserve it, plus it looks really cool. Okay, painting! The part everyone's been waiting for. Or not, maybe. I don't know. Since my doll had a different skin colour than I desired her to have, I had to paint her pink first. For that I used plain old acrylic colours and simply painted her the colour I wanted her to. I needed a couple of coats because after adding the first one you could still see the original skin shine through. That's totally normal, so you just have to go back and forth, paint it, let it dry, paint it, let it dry, you know, so on and so forth. Looking back at it, maybe painting the doll white first or adding some gesso as a base may have been the way to go and may have quickened that process up a little, but I simply forgot to do it, and so here we are now. Sorry. Sorry. It still turned out alright in the end. Oh, also, quick hint. It is completely normal for the paint to chip near the movable areas. It's kind of sad, but also you can't really avoid it. I also painted the head the same colour as I paint the body, and then painted the area where the hair would sit a little lighter so it would fit in with the pink and the white that I'd chosen for the hair wefts. I will not always mention it when we go forward, but I sprayed down the doll with fixative whenever I felt like what I had just painted on looked really nice and I wanted to save it. So please be aware of that and just go on to do that with your doll if you decide to make one as well. Now here's where things get a little bit fuzzy. Yes, also because we're about to add the hair to the head, but that's not the only reason. It's also because my memory is trash, basically. Now here's the thing, I've been working on this doll as well as other projects simultaneously, always going back and forth between different things, letting one dry, working on the other, and so on and so forth. So the way I worked on this wasn't really totally linear, and so it is quite hard to piece it back together. So for the sake of just understanding and learning and whatnot, I will split this one up and just show you how I made one thing first and the next thing, you know, body, head, hair, clothes, and so on and so forth. I also want to apologise, I go out of frame quite a lot during this video. I'm really sorry for that. I didn't notice while I was filming, and since I was filming the doll while I was making it, I can't really go back and redo it. It's a bit hard to find a nice camera positioning just to have everything in frame and still be able to work on it and to see what I'm doing. So I apologise for that, and I'm working on making that better for future videos. After painting the head, you can glue on your hair wefts. I basically followed the Mosaikito tutorial that I mentioned earlier, so please check that out. I'll leave the link in the description down below. Just real quick, to create the hairline, I glued on the wefts wrong side first to then flip them over and have that really nice crisp line. Same thing goes for the middle part. Then to go on, I glued on the other wefts opposite so that they would stick together like this, and went around in rounds between the two parts that I split up first. None of that makes sense, does it? I also tried to add some highlights, but they wouldn't stick, so looking back onto it, my doll's hair got way too fluffy. That is the thing with yarn hair that I didn't know and then found out later. It is totally okay to use less of it because it will get really poofy and fluffy. But you know, I don't mind. Fluff is good, fluff is cute. I like fluff. So while all of that is drying, you can paint your body. To add some depth and highlights, I went back in with an acrylic colour that was either one tone deeper or lighter than that which was already on the doll. This again will take some time and some layering, always going back and forth and going shades darker or lighter with every layer you paint on. So just patience, that's all I'm saying. Time and patience, really. After I liked what I saw, I added some really bright highlights and shine with actual white colour. Then I sealed everything with fixative. Only do so after you're really happy with what you've created. I then tried to blush the body with actual pastels, but it didn't really work out the way I wanted it to, so I just stuck with the acrylics. While shading the doll, try and watch out for how the light falls on her body. Also think about how light falls on actual human beings. There's areas that are naturally light and areas that are naturally darker on a human body, since it's so 3D. You know, there's points standing out and points going back in. So watching and keeping an eye out for that is really helpful with this part. Here's another thing I wanted to mention. Whichever medium you use, may it be acrylics, pastels or watercolours, will in the end give you different results. All of those have a certain material and textural quality to them. So sometimes things may not work out the way you want simply because you're not using the correct medium. Be aware of those differences before you pick which medium you want to use to paint your doll. To give my doll some extra pizzazz, can't believe I just said that, but to make my doll a little bit special, I wanted to add some glittering spirals all over her body. A slight inspiration for that may have been the airbender tattoos from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So what I did was I mixed together some different sorts of glitter. Some were chunky, some were like a little bit finer. Altogether I mixed in some pinks, some whites, some holographic pink-white glittery stuff to just have a different texture going on and to have the colours play a little when you move the doll. Then I used some varnish to paint the spiral on and then dabbed on the glitter to stick to the varnish. I didn't really want to use glue because I'd have to ruin one of my finer pencils to dip into the glue and then paint it on, so the varnish worked out well. I also went over it with a couple of coats of varnish afterwards and then glossed them up with high gloss varnish when I thought it looked cute, because that would just bring out the glittery quality again. On to the head! Yay! You want to tie off all of her hair before you go on to actually paint the head, because you don't want the paint to get all over your hair, do you? Like, not your hair, but the doll's head. You know what I mean. Again, I shaded the head similarly to the body. I also tried pastels again, but they did not work. They just did not work for me. Similarly to how I added the sparkles to the body, I also added some glitter to her cheeks. I then went on to paint the face on. I must say, it is quite hard to work on a canvas that is this tiny. I think my face turned out a little darker and more angry looking than I wanted it to, but I'm still happy with the outcome, you know, it's my first try, so. I then removed the hair wrap and just went back in with a little bit of colour to adjust the hairline. I also added some lashes. These are regular human, I mean not made from human, but like for humans, drugstore makeup lashes that I just cut to size and glued on. I also went over the eyes and the lips with some glossy varnish. Then I gave her a fancy new hairdo. Remember how I wanted space buns? That didn't fully work out because, again, the hair got too fluffy. It was just too thick to fit into just 2 buns. So I just gave her a regular middle part and added 2 buns on the sides while her longer hair was still flowing out there in the wind. Like this. Not like this. Probably not like this. To tie them off, like the buns, I used the yarn that I originally wanted to use as highlights and just wrapped them around the little pieces of hair that I had secured. Oh, and I also trimmed the edges of the hair down here a little bit too. I then took a very thin thread as well as a beading needle to stitch some little beads into the space buns. You know, just to put the space, just to put the space in space buns, because they look like little stars. Onto her outfit. Sketch showed a little really cute baby doll-like dress with a very poofy skirt and simple bodice. I measured most of my fabric straight onto them. So I thought going into this was, I make human-sized clothes, you know? And that's fairly hard, so how hard could it actually be to make doll-sized clothes? Well, let me tell you, my friend. Really, really, really hard. So much harder. Sometimes literally, actually. Because fabric bulks a lot more on a tiny scale. Like, it builds up and then you have a lot of layers, and it wouldn't fall the same way it would if you had an actual human-sized model. It's just a whole world of insanity. So I ditched my sewing machine and sewed everything by hand. So for the bodice, I took 2 strips of fabric and sewed them together like I usually would a collar, then turned them and of course left one side open so I could later put the skirt in there. I also ruffled it up near the cleavage part so it would look like she'd had like a heart collar or something like that going on. So for the skirt I used the same fabric and I did pretty much the same thing I'd do with the human-sized skirt if I wanted to ruffle it, meaning that I sewed along one edge in a really, really long stitch length and then just ruffled it up like you would a curtain. I wanted to do several layers of skirt just because I thought it would look a lot cuter and poofier, but turns out all of that stuff wouldn't really fit in my tiny top and would really bulk up. So it was just one skirt that finally went into the bodice and 2 layers of actual underskirt that I put on separately. So again, to make the aforementioned underskirt, I ruffled 2 pieces of meshed fabric. For this I actually used an elastic thread so I'd be able to pull it off and on the doll very easily. I also added a little piece of fabric in there that would later go between the legs and keep the skirt where it belonged. I then closed the skirt with a back seam and added some hooks to the bodice so that I could open and close it and put it on the doll very easily. I also added some lace straps to the dress to A, keep it up, and B, hide the ugliness where the paint had chipped off. I also added some other details like some beads around the cleavage area and some lace around the hips as well. My original Flora doll also had those really cute hoop earrings that I wanted to reuse, but sadly I then noticed that I couldn't really reach the ears anymore, and I had also painted over the little holes and they were pretty much sealed off. So I removed the spike that was actually meant to go in the doll's ear and used them as hair clips. Before I did that though, I painted them white and also added some glitter on it, the same way I did with the body of the doll. I also glued some of those really cute rose gold heart beads on there. Also gave her some bracelets, anklets and a necklace made from the same beads I used to sew into the hair. Now, all I had to do was take her into the woods and take some enchanting photos. Well, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed my foray into doll customization as much as I did. I think I might have stumbled across a new hobby here, one that I might grow quite fond of actually. I also still need a name for the subject of this video, so if you have any ideas, any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. Anyways, I think I'm quite happy with the end result. There are plenty of things that could have gone better, and some things that I will probably note to make better in the future. If you have any additions to that list, again, please feel free to tell me. I still wanted to thank Hextion, Delightful, Atalan, and Mosaikito. I will leave all of their channels down below, of course. I also wanted to thank you, dear watcher. Thank you for sticking with me throughout this whole entire video. As always, please feel free to like, share and subscribe, or contact me on any of my socials. I of course will leave them in the description box down below. Please everyone, have a great day, take care of yourself, stay safe, and never forget, you live and you learn.